For over 50 years, the old lighthouse at Eldridge Point stood firm against the Atlantic's fury. Weathered, locals called it the Widow's Light, a grim nickname tied to the storms that swallowed sailors whole. But no one knew the real story. No one knew the man behind the light. Thomas Weaver had manned the lighthouse since 1967. He arrived quietly, a war veteran with a worn duffel bag and eyes that had seen too much. He kept to himself, tending the lamp, recording tides, and logging every passing vessel in careful, faded handwriting. The Coast Guard assumed he retired years ago, but the light still shone. Even when power outages hit, even when the fog rolled in thick as smoke, what no one knew was this: Thomas was more than a keeper of the light. During the worst storms, when the sea turned savage and rescue boats turned back, Thomas went down the cliffs himself, lowering ropes, lighting flares, pulling men out of the water with his bare hands. Dozens of lives over decades. No medals, no recognition, just entries in a private journal, locked beneath the floorboards. But time catches everyone. At 84, Thomas was fading. One winter night after a harsh storm, a local fisherman found him collapsed at the lighthouse door, barely breathing, soaked to the bone, clutching a single envelope. At the hospital, Thomas whispered a single phrase to the nurse: "Tell the Coast Guard." Check the logbook. Then he slipped into silence. The Coast Guard arrived the next morning, confused. As they climbed the spiral stairs of the lighthouse, they noticed something strange. The lamp was warm, recently lit. The radio had been used, but the real shock came when they lifted the floorboard beneath Thomas's. Carton found the journal. Inside were pages and pages of names, dates, and details rescues never reported. People saved during storms when no help had arrived, all signed with the same initials, TW. One officer gasped, "He saved them all." But just as they reached the final page of the journal, one entry stood out, different from the rest. Scribbled hastily, dated the same night Thomas collapsed, it read, "It came back. The ship that was lost. I saw its light in the fog, and beneath it, a drawing of a vessel no one had ever seen." The journal page was barely legible, soaked with seawater and written in a trembling hand. It came back. The ship that was lost. Coast Guard Officer Daniels reread the line over and over, heart pounding. The drawing beneath it chilled him, a jagged silhouette of a tall-masted vessel, cloaked in fog with no visible crew. The ship's name was smudged, but one word could be made out in shaky ink: Delilah. Back at headquarters, Daniels dug into the Coast Guard archives. No ship by that name had reported activity in over 70 years. In fact, the Delilah was officially listed as missing, last seen in 1953, lost during a violent nor'easter with all hands presumed dead. So how did Thomas Weaver, a man who arrived at Eldridge Point in 1967, see it just days ago? The next storm hit 2 nights later. Ferocious winds, blackout conditions. The lighthouse, now manned by a temporary crew, lost power for 12 minutes. When it came back online, the surveillance camera facing the sea captured a single frame, a flicker of sails gliding through the fog. Daniels returned to the lighthouse to investigate. In the lantern room, he found something no one else had touched: a sealed tin box hidden behind a loose stone in the wall. Inside were dozens of old photos, yellowed with age. But one photo stood out, a black and white picture of the Delilah, docked, intact, with Thomas Weaver standing in front of it as a young man. But that couldn't be. The photo was dated June 8th, 1952, a full year before the Delilah disappeared. Heart-pounding, Daniels flipped the photo. On the back, in the same spidery handwriting as the journal, were just 4 words. "I wasn't supposed to survive." The wind outside howled. The beacon flickered. And somewhere beyond the mist, a low, mournful foghorn cried out, a sound no one had heard in decades. Daniels turned toward the sea and saw a distant light bobbing in the fog, slowly moving toward the shore. The light moved closer, slowly, unnaturally, as if the sea obeyed it. Officer Daniels stood frozen in the lantern room, watching the fog pulse like breath. He radioed for backup, but all he got was static. Below, waves began crashing harder against the rocks. Yet the air inside the lighthouse was deathly still. Then the foghorn sounded again, louder, closer. He gripped the old journal tighter. The last entry had said it came back. But what if it had never really left? Daniels descended the spiral staircase and stepped outside, boots crunching on the gravel path. The beam of the lighthouse swept across the blackness, then caught it. A ship, the Delilah, but it didn't make sense. It wasn't rusted or sunken. It was intact, pristine even, sails full, no signs of wear. And yet, something was off. The ship glowed faintly, like the light was trapped inside the wood itself. And it made no sound, no creaking hull, no slapping water. Just that foghorn still crying in the distance. He reached the shore just as the ship drifted closer, but didn't dock. It hovered, a few feet above the waterline, tethered to nothing. Then a figure appeared on deck, tall, dressed in a tattered naval coat, face hidden in shadow, motionless. Daniels raised his flashlight. "Hello? This is Officer Daniels with the U.S. Coast Guard. Do you need assistance?" The figure didn't speak, but the voice that replied didn't come from the man. It came from behind Daniels. "You shouldn't have come back." Daniels spun around, but no one was there. The journal in his hand suddenly felt hot. He opened it to a new page, a page that hadn't been there before. The ink was fresh. "If you board her, you don't return." The figure on the ship lifted a hand, and something dropped onto the deck. It clattered like metal. Daniel strained to see. It was a dog tag. He rushed toward the shoreline, driven by impulse. As he reached the water's edge, a wave surged forward, soaking his boots. And in that moment, the ship vanished. No sound, no trace, just fog. He blinked, looked down. The dog tag lay at his feet, the name engraved on it, Thomas Weaver. Daniel stared in disbelief. But he survived. Or had he? Back at the hospital, Thomas Weaver's body had gone missing. The bed was empty, and the nurse on duty swore she'd seen a figure in a naval coat walking out. Just before midnight, whistling a tune no one had heard in years. The Delilah floated silently in the harbor. No ripples, no sound, just an eerie stillness that felt wrong. Officer Daniels stood at the shoreline, holding the dog tag engraved Thomas Weaver. His breath formed clouds in the air, though the night wasn't cold. The gangplank lowered with a groan, like the ship was breathing. Then a figure emerged from the fog. It was Thomas, but younger, far younger than the man Daniels had met in the hospital. His posture was strong, eyes clear, face unwrinkled. He looked restored. "I wasn't meant to survive that night," Thomas said quietly. "The storm chose me, just like it's choosing you now." Daniels stepped back. "What do you mean, chose?" Thomas looked at the lighthouse behind them. Its beacon flickered once, then twice. A power surge or something more? The journal in Daniel's hand began to hum faintly. Thomas pointed toward the deck. More figures appeared, men and women in uniforms from decades past. They didn't speak. They simply watched. Some had faces bruised by the sea, others with sunken eyes and frozen stares. Ghosts of the storm. "They're not dead," Thomas said. "They're bound." "Bound to what?" Daniels whispered. "To the Delilah. To the Covenant." Daniels blinked. "What covenant?" Thomas hesitated, then turned, slowly walking back up the gangplank. The others followed. As the last one stepped aboard, the ship began to rise, again not sailing, but lifting into the fog. Daniels shouted, "Wait! Tell me what this means." Thomas looked back once. The lighthouse was never just a building. It's a gate. Then the fog swallowed them whole. The next morning the sky was clear, the harbor empty. But something was wrong with the lighthouse. Inside, the lantern room had changed. The walls were covered in carvings, names, dates, coordinates. Some were ancient, some from the future. And in the center of the floor, glowing faintly, was a new page from the journal. The ink was still wet. It read, "Storm inbound. Next chosen, Daniels. May 31. Daniels stared out to sea as a black cloud began to form on the horizon, far too fast to be natural. The radio crackled violently behind him, and then a voice whispered through the static, "The sea remembers what we forget." The storm hit without warning. No weather service predicted it. No radar picked it up. But at exactly midnight on May 31st, just as the journal had said, the sky above, Eldridge Point cracked open. Thunder screamed like tortured steel. The lighthouse shook. Officer Daniels stood in the lantern room, clutching the journal to his chest as rain slammed against the glass. The new entry had burned itself into the page. He must choose. Below the waves, something stirred. The ocean didn't just churn, it pulled, like the sea itself was inhaling. Down at the base of the cliff, a circle of light shimmered beneath the water, faint, ancient, impossibly large. Daniels grabbed a flare, rushed down the winding stairs, and reached the cliff's edge, just in time to see something rise from the deep. Not the Delilah, but a stone archway, carved in runes glowing with blue fire, rising slowly like a cathedral from the abyss. It wasn't man-made. It wasn't even of this world. As waves crashed around its base, a beam of ghostly light fired from the lighthouse, striking the top of the arch, and the storm above paused. Frozen lightning, silent thunder, time itself held its breath. Then a voice, not from a radio, not from a man, from inside Daniel's mind. We are the keepers of the drift. The Delilah sails between storms, through the breach. Every 100 years, the gate opens. One must enter to remember what the world forgets. Daniels dropped to his knees as memories not his own flooded his thoughts. Centuries of men and women chosen as keepers, bound to a ship that could cross time, storms, and even death itself. He saw ancient seafarers, Roman mariners, even Viking longboats, all drawn to this place, all linked to the same myth, a ship that rescues souls meant to die and carries them through the storm beyond storms. But this time something was different. The journal had begun to bleed, black ink running like oil, spreading across the cover. Daniels turned to the arch and for a brief second saw a figure standing inside it. It was Thomas. Older again, weathered, crying. "Don't let it through," Thomas whispered. Then he vanished. Suddenly, the gate began to crack, fissures spreading along the stone like lightning veins. The sea raged. A vortex formed. Daniels realized something horrifying. The gate doesn't just let ships out. It lets something else in. A sound like no storm on earth filled the sky. A low hum, a presence. And from deep beneath the waves, another ship began to rise, larger than the Delilah, older, darker. Its hull was made of black bone, its sails torn from shadow. Not a rescue vessel, a reaper. Daniels stood frozen as the final journal page flipped on its own, revealing just 4 blood-red words. The countership returns tonight. The sea roared. The ancient gate, cracked and glowing, pulsed like a heartbeat. Thunder howled above. Eldridge Point as 2 ships stood opposite one. Another, one gleaming faintly with hope, the other wreathed in blackness and bone. The Delilah and the countership. Officer Daniels watched from the lantern room, heart pounding. Inside him, memories not his own churned like the ocean, echoes of past keepers, of storms weathered across centuries, of battles fought not for land or gold, but for time itself. The journal burst into flame in his hands, but the fire didn't burn. Instead, it opened a final page, one that shimmered with golden light. You must remember the light, or the storm will take everything. Outside, the countership let out a guttural groan, as if it breathed. Dozens of faceless figures moved across its decks, formed from mist and shadow, chained to the mast by glowing runes. Each one a soul claimed, not saved. And then, the gate opened fully. A burst of blue-white light exploded across the water as the Delilah charged, slicing through the mist like a blade of memory. A bell rang from its deck, ancient and deep, shaking the air itself. Daniels turned and saw her, the first keeper, a woman with silver eyes and windswept hair, standing in the lantern room with him. Though the door had never opened, "This is what the lighthouse was made for," she whispered, "to hold back what the sea forgets." Suddenly the lighthouse beam shot through the storm, focusing on the gate, empowered by the names in the journal, by centuries of lightkeepers who gave their lives to hold it open just long enough. Below, the 2 ships collided, but instead of breaking, they merged, light and shadow clashing in a whirlpool of memory, sound, and soul. The sea exploded into a vortex that spiraled into the sky, drawing the gate, the ships, and the storm into itself. And then, silence, not peace, void. Daniel stood in the aftermath, on a calm sea under a clear sky. The lighthouse was still behind him, whole, glowing. But he was no longer in Eldridge Point. He stood on water, weightless. A voice spoke, not around him, but within him. You passed the trial. The light remembers you now. Before him, 1,000 points of light formed the shape of the Delilah, now restored and floating in silence. Figures stood on its deck. Thomas, the first keeper, others from centuries past. Thomas smiled gently. You saved them, but the storm will return. One day, Daniels nodded slowly. What happens now? The woman stepped forward, placing a hand over his heart. Now you become the lighthouse. A burst of golden energy enveloped him. Back on the rocky coast of Eldridge Point, the lighthouse remains. Tourists visit, boats pass, but on some nights, when fog drifts too close and the sea begins to hum, captains hear a voice, not over radio, but in their dreams. Hold your heading, I'll guide you home. And somewhere beyond the reach of maps, the Delilah sails on, still watching, still waiting.